The explosion came without warning. Sarah Martinez was walking through the marketplace in Kandahar when the world turned white, then black. The blast threw her 15 feet across the dusty ground, and when consciousness returned, she found herself trapped under a collapsed wooden stall. Pain shot through her left leg like lightning, and warm blood trickled down her forehead. Sarah was a photojournalist, 28 years old, who had spent the last 3 years documenting life in war zones. She came to Afghanistan to tell the stories that others couldn't or wouldn't tell. The stories of ordinary people living extraordinary lives under the shadow of conflict. But now, as she lay pinned beneath the debris, she wondered if this would be her final story. The marketplace had been bustling with life just moments before. Vendors called out their prices for fresh bread and colorful fabrics. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter mixing with the sound of haggling customers. Sarah had been photographing an elderly man selling pomegranates when the improvised, explosive device hidden in a nearby cart detonated. The silence that followed the blast was more terrifying than the explosion itself. Then came the screams. People called out for their loved ones in Pashto and Dari. Sarah tried to move but found her leg pinned under a heavy wooden beam. Every attempt to shift her position sent waves of agony through her body. Dust filled her lungs, making each breath a struggle. She could taste blood in her mouth and feel it running from a cut above her eye. Her camera, which had been her constant companion for years, lay smashed several feet away. The lens was cracked and the body was dented beyond repair. As Sarah fought to stay conscious, she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy boots crunched on the debris-covered ground. She tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a whisper. Fear gripped her as she realized she couldn't tell if the approaching figures were friendly or hostile. Through the haze of pain and dust, she saw a figure in military fatigues kneeling beside her. The man wore the uniform of the U.S. Navy, and she could make out the medical insignia on his sleeve. Relief flooded through her as she realized help had arrived. The medic was tall and lean, with kind eyes that immediately assessed her condition. His name tape read Rodriguez, and she could see the trident pin that marked him as a Navy SEAL. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he began checking her vital signs. Sarah had covered enough military operations to know that SEAL medics were among the best trained in the world. They had to be. Their teammates' lives often depended on their ability to provide medical care under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. But this medic seemed different somehow. There was something in his eyes that suggested he had seen more than his share of casualties. The medic quickly assessed the wooden beam pinning her leg. He called out to his teammates in the clipped professional language that all military personnel used in crisis situations. Within minutes, 2 other SEALs appeared and began carefully lifting the debris. As they worked to free her, Sarah noticed how the medic's eyes kept scanning the area around them. Even while treating her injuries, he remained alert for potential threats. This was second nature for someone who had operated in hostile territory for years. When they finally freed her leg, Sarah could see the extent of the damage. Her left leg was clearly broken and blood soaked through her pants. The medic immediately began applying pressure to stop the bleeding, while simultaneously checking for other injuries. Sarah tried to speak, to tell him her name and that she was an American journalist, but the words wouldn't come. The pain was overwhelming, and she felt herself slipping in and out of consciousness. Each time she opened her eyes, the medic was there, working steadily to stabilize her condition. The medic's hands were gentle but firm as he splinted her broken leg using materials from his medical kit. Sarah had seen field medicine before, but never from this perspective. She was amazed at how calm and focused he remained despite the chaos surrounding them. Other injured people lay scattered around the marketplace. Local Afghan civilians, some crying out in pain, others ominously silent. Sarah could see the medic's teammates moving between the casualties, providing what aid they could. But this medic stayed with her, working methodically to address each of her injuries. As he cleaned the cut on her forehead, Sarah got her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps 35 years old, with weathered features that spoke of countless deployments to dangerous places. There were lines around his eyes that came from squinting against desert sun and wind. His movements were precise and economical, wasting no motion or time. The medic established an IV line in her arm with practiced ease, despite the difficult conditions. Sarah noticed that his hands, though calloused and scarred, were surprisingly gentle. These were hands that had probably held weapons and taken lives. but they were also hands that had saved many lives. As the morphine began to take effect, dulling the sharp edges of her pain, Sarah found herself studying the medic's face. There was something about his expression that puzzled her. While he worked with complete professionalism, she sensed he was evaluating her in a way that went beyond standard medical assessment. The medic spoke quietly into his radio, calling for evacuation transport. His voice was calm and controlled, giving precise details about her condition and the urgency of the situation. Sarah could hear helicopters in the distance growing closer. As they waited for evacuation, the medic continued monitoring her vital signs and adjusting her treatment. He spoke to her in a low, reassuring voice, explaining what he was doing and what would happen next. His presence was somehow comforting in a way that went beyond his medical expertise. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying her reactions, watching how she responded to pain and stress. It was subtle, but she had spent years reading people through her camera lens, and she could sense when someone was evaluating her. The sound of rotors grew louder, and dust began swirling around them as the helicopter approached. The medic looked directly into her eyes, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his expression. It was as if he had just noticed something that surprised him. As the evacuation team prepared to load her onto the aircraft, the medic leaned closer. His next words would puzzle her for days to come, setting in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The words came quietly, almost lost in the roar of the approaching helicopter. "Have you ever been battle-trained?" The question seemed so out of place that Sarah initially thought she had misheard him. The morphine was making everything feel distant and strange, but she was certain those were the words the SEAL medic had spoken. Sarah stared at him through the haze of pain medication, trying to process what he had asked. Battle-trained. She was a photojournalist, not a soldier. Why would a Navy SEAL medic ask such a question while she lay broken and bleeding in an Afghan marketplace? Before she could respond, the evacuation team was lifting her onto a stretcher. The medic's question hung in the air between them as they carried her toward the waiting helicopter. She caught glimpses of his face as they moved, and she could see that he was still watching her intently, as if her answer mattered more than it should. The helicopter ride to the field hospital was a blur of medical activity. The flight medic worked alongside the SEAL medic to keep her stable during transport. Through the fog of medication and shock, Sarah found herself thinking about the question. Battle-trained. What had he seen in her behavior that prompted such an inquiry? As a photojournalist covering conflict zones, Sarah had certainly been through hostile environment training. She knew how to recognize potential threats, how to move through dangerous areas, and how to react under pressure. But that was journalist training, not military training. The distinction seemed important, though she couldn't quite grasp why. At the field hospital, a team of doctors and nurses took over her care. The SEAL medic gave a quick briefing on her condition and the treatment he had provided, then disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Sarah wanted to call out to him, to ask what he had meant by his question, but the medical team was already wheeling her into surgery. The surgeon, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, explained that Sarah had suffered a compound fracture of her left tibia, a concussion, and various cuts and bruises. The leg would require surgery to set the bone properly and clean out debris from the blast. Recovery would take months, but she would walk again. As they prepared her for surgery, Sarah's mind kept returning to the medic's question. In her years of covering wars and conflicts, she had met many military personnel. Most treated her with professional courtesy, some with suspicion, and a few with the protective instinct that soldiers often showed toward civilians in danger. But none had ever asked if she had military training. The surgery went well, according to the doctors. When Sarah woke up in recovery, her leg was encased in a cast from ankle to thigh. Her head felt clearer, though still fuzzy from the anesthesia. A nurse informed her that she would be transferred to a larger military hospital in Germany for further treatment and rehabilitation. It was during the flight to Germany that Sarah first began to piece together why the medic's question had seemed so significant. She replayed the events in the marketplace, trying to remember her own actions and reactions during the attack. She had been thrown by the blast and trapped under debris, certainly, but even through the pain and confusion, she had remained relatively calm. She hadn't panicked or screamed, despite being severely injured. When the medic had appeared, She had automatically assessed him just as he had assessed her, noting his unit patches, his medical insignia, and his general demeanor. Most civilians caught in a terrorist attack would have been in complete shock, crying, screaming, or at least showing obvious signs of trauma. Sarah realized that her response had been more measured, more controlled. She had instinctively evaluated the tactical situation and her rescuers, just as her hostile environment training had taught her. But there was something else, something that nagged at the edge of her memory. As the medic had worked on her injuries, she had found herself automatically monitoring his techniques, mentally cataloging his procedures. This wasn't the passive observation of a journalist, but something more active, more professional. At the hospital in Germany, Sarah began the long process of recovery. The orthopedic surgeon was optimistic about her progress, and physical therapy was helping her regain strength in her injured leg. But she couldn't stop thinking about the SEAL medic and his unexpected question. She tried to research the unit that had rescued her, hoping to find some way to contact the medic. Through her journalistic connections, she learned that the team had been conducting a routine patrol when the marketplace bombing occurred. They had responded immediately to provide aid to casualties, as military personnel were trained to do. But she couldn't find any specific information about the medic who had treated her. Military personnel records weren't easily accessible to civilians, even journalists with security clearances. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she actually knew about the man who had saved her life. During her weeks of recovery, Sarah found herself having vivid dreams about the attack. But in her dreams, she wasn't just a victim of the blast. She was moving through the marketplace with purpose, scanning for threats, evaluating escape routes. In the dreams, she knew things she shouldn't know, reacted in ways she hadn't been trained to react. The hospital psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Morrison, explained that trauma often affected memory and dreams in unusual ways. The mind sometimes created false memories or enhanced certain aspects of real events, but Sarah was certain that her dreams weren't just trauma responses. They felt too real, too specific. During one of their sessions, Dr. Morrison mentioned that some people had natural tactical instincts, even without formal military training. Some individuals just seemed to have an innate understanding of threat assessment and crisis response, she explained. It's not uncommon among war correspondents who've spent years in conflict zones, but Sarah knew it was more than that. The dreams weren't just about general tactical awareness. They contained specific knowledge about weapons, battlefield medicine, and small unit tactics. Knowledge that she shouldn't possess but somehow did. As her physical recovery progressed, Sarah began to dig deeper into her own background. She had always known she was adopted, but her adoptive parents had told her that her birth parents had died in a car accident when she was very young. She had never felt the need to investigate further. Now, however, she found herself wondering if there might be more to her story. The medic's question had unlocked something in her mind, some buried memory or instinct that she couldn't explain. She decided that when she was well enough to travel, she would return to the United States and try to learn more about her origins. The breakthrough came during a particularly intense physical therapy session. As she worked to regain strength in her injured leg, the therapist had her perform a series of balance and coordination exercises. One exercise involved moving through an obstacle course while carrying weighted objects. As Sarah navigated the course, something clicked in her mind. Her movements became fluid and efficient, and she found herself automatically using techniques she didn't remember learning. The physical therapist, a former military medic himself, stopped the exercise and stared at her. "Where did you learn to move like that?" he asked. The question echoed the SEAL medic's words, and Sarah realized that whatever he had seen in her behavior, others could see it too. The truth about her past was somehow written in her instincts and reflexes, waiting to be decoded. 3 months after the marketplace bombing, Sarah finally returned to the United States. Her leg had healed well enough for her to walk with only a slight limp, but the questions raised by the SEAL medic's words continued to haunt her. She had taken a leave of absence from her job at the news magazine, telling her editor that she needed time to recover from her injuries. But recovery wasn't really what she was after. Sarah's adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, lived in a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. They had raised her with love and support, encouraging her adventurous spirit even when it led her to dangerous places around the world. But now, as she sat in their familiar living room, Sarah felt like she was seeing them with new eyes. "Mom, Dad, I need to ask you about my birth parents again." Sarah began carefully. She had broached this subject before over the years, but never with the intensity she felt now. "I know you told me they died in a car accident, but I'm starting to think there might be more to the story." Her adoptive parents exchanged a look that Sarah had learned to read over the years. It was the same expression they had worn when she was 16 and had asked about getting a motorcycle, or when she was 22 and had announced her intention to become a war correspondent. It was concern mixed with resignation. Linda Martinez, a retired school teacher, set down her coffee cup and sighed. "Sarah, honey, what's brought this on? You've never seemed particularly interested in your biological parents before." Sarah told them about the marketplace bombing, about the SEAL medic's strange question, and about the dreams and instincts she couldn't explain. As she spoke, she watched her parents' faces carefully. They were trying to hide it, but she could see they knew more than they had told her. Robert Martinez, a former police detective, was the first to crack. "Linda, maybe it's time," he said quietly. "She's been through enough and she's asking direct questions. She deserves to know. What they told her changed everything. Sarah's birth parents hadn't died in a car accident. Her father had been a special operations soldier, and her mother had been a military intelligence analyst. They had both been killed during a classified mission when Sarah was 3 years old. The car accident story had been a cover to protect Sarah's identity and keep her safe from potential enemies who might target the families of fallen special operations personnel. "We were friends with your birth parents," Linda explained, tears in her eyes. "Your father, Michael Chen, was Robert's partner before he left the police force to join the military. Your mother, Catherine, was one of the smartest people I ever met. They loved you so much, Sarah. When they died, we didn't hesitate to adopt you." Sarah felt the world shifting around her as she processed this information. Her birth father had been special operations. Her mother had been intelligence. Suddenly, the medic's question made perfect sense. He had seen something in her behavior, some genetic inheritance of skills and instincts that she had never known she possessed. "What kind of special operations?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Your father was a Navy SEAL," Robert said quietly. "He served with SEAL Team 6 before transferring to a joint task force. Your mother worked with various agencies, but her specialty was battlefield intelligence gathering." The pieces were falling into place with startling clarity. The dreams, the instincts, the way she had reacted under pressure in the marketplace. She wasn't just a journalist who had learned to work in dangerous places. She was the daughter of 2 highly trained military professionals, and their skills had somehow been passed down to her. "Is that why I've always been drawn to conflict zones?" Sarah asked. "Why I feel comfortable in situations that terrify other people?" "We've wondered about that," Linda admitted. "You were so young when they died, but even as a child you showed remarkable courage and situational awareness. You never seemed afraid of things that scared other children." Sarah spent the next several days going through boxes of her birth parents' belongings that the Martinezes had kept for her. There were photos of her father in dress blues looking impossibly young and proud, pictures of her mother in various locations around the world, always alert and professional even in casual shots. But the most revealing items were the personal journals and letters they had written. Her father's journal entries described training exercises and missions in language that Sarah now recognized as advanced tactical terminology. Her mother's letters to friends contained casual references to surveillance techniques and intelligence analysis that went far beyond basic military training. Reading their words, Sarah felt a connection to parents she had never really known. But more than that, she began to understand herself in a way she never had before. The skills and instincts that had kept her alive in dangerous situations around the world weren't just luck or good training. They were an inheritance from parents who had lived and died in the shadows of special operations. One evening, as she sat reading her mother's journal, Sarah found an entry that stopped her cold. Catherine Chen had written about the genetic component of tactical thinking and survival instincts. She theorized that children of special operations personnel might inherit not just physical traits, but also cognitive patterns that enhanced their ability to function under stress. "It's not that military skills are genetic," Catherine had written, "but the mental frameworks that allow someone to excel in special operations might be passed down through generations. Pattern recognition, threat assessment, emotional regulation under pressure. These are cognitive abilities that could be inherited just like intelligence or artistic talent. Sarah realized that the SEAL medic who had treated her might have recognized these inherited traits. As a special operations medical professional, he would have been trained to assess people quickly and accurately. He would have seen something in her responses that marked her as different from a typical civilian casualty. Armed with this new understanding of her background, Sarah made a decision. She needed to find the medic who had saved her life and ask that crucial question, not just to thank him, but to understand what he had seen in her and why it had mattered enough for him to ask about her training. Through her journalistic contacts and some persistent investigation, Sarah finally tracked down information about the SEAL team that had been in Kandahar that day. The team was part of a special operations task force, and the medic's name was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez. He was currently stationed at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. Getting access to an active duty SEAL would not be easy, but Sarah's credentials as a respected war correspondent opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. She contacted the Public Affairs Office at Naval Special Warfare Command and requested an interview about battlefield medicine and the treatment of civilian casualties in combat zones. To her surprise, they agreed to arrange a meeting. Chief Rodriguez had apparently received commendations for his actions during the marketplace bombing, and the Navy was willing to allow him to speak with a journalist about his work, within the bounds of operational security. As Sarah prepared for the trip to California, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't experienced since her first assignment in a war zone. She was about to meet the man who had not only saved her life but had also, with a single question, set her on a path to discovering her true identity. The answers she sought lay just ahead, but Sarah suspected that learning the truth about what the medic had seen in her would raise even more questions about who she really was and what she was capable of becoming. The Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado was unlike any military installation Sarah had ever visited. Even as a journalist who had covered numerous military stories, she found herself impressed by the understated professionalism that permeated the facility. The SEALs she passed in the corridors moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of countless hours of training and real-world experience. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez met her in a small conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. In person, away from the chaos and danger of the Afghan marketplace, he appeared even more imposing than Sarah remembered. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who had spent years operating in harsh environments. But his eyes held the same kindness she remembered from that terrible day. "Ms. Martinez," he said, standing as she entered the room, "I'm glad to see you're walking well. How has your recovery been?" They spent the first few minutes discussing her injuries and rehabilitation. Rodriguez was genuinely interested in her progress, asking detailed questions about her physical therapy and the surgical procedures she had undergone. His medical training was evident in the precision of his inquiries, but Sarah could sense that he was also evaluating her, just as he had in Afghanistan. She noticed how his eyes tracked her movements, how he observed her posture and bearing. It was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had learned to read body language in dangerous situations. "Chief Rodriguez," Sarah finally said, "I need to ask you about something you said in the marketplace. You asked if I had been battle-trained. That question has been bothering me for months." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "I remember that question. What bothers you about it?" "Because I hadn't been battle-trained, but you asked it anyway. And since then I've learned some things about myself that make me think you saw something in me that I didn't even know existed." Sarah told him about discovering her parents' true background, about the inherited skills and instincts she was only now beginning to understand. As she spoke, she watched Rodriguez's expression carefully. He didn't seem surprised by any of what she was telling him. "You knew," she said suddenly. "Somehow you knew I wasn't just a regular civilian." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "In my line of work, you learn to read people very quickly. Lives often depend on being able to assess someone's capabilities and intentions in seconds. When I found you in that marketplace, your responses weren't typical of an untrained civilian in crisis." He explained what he had observed. Despite being severely injured and trapped, Sarah had remained calm and alert. When he had approached, she had automatically assessed his uniform and insignia. identifying him as medical personnel before relaxing slightly. Most importantly, when he had begun treating her injuries, she had monitored his procedures with the focused attention of someone who understood what he was doing. Civilians usually either panic or go into shock in situations like that, Rodriguez said. You did neither. You were evaluating the tactical situation and the people around you, even while seriously wounded. That kind of response is usually only seen in people with military or law enforcement training. But I'm a journalist, Sarah protested. I've had some hostile environment training, but nothing like military preparation. Hostile environment training teaches you to avoid danger and seek help when things go wrong, Rodriguez replied. What I saw in you was different. You were thinking like someone who had been trained to operate in dangerous situations, not just survive them. He paused, then continued. There's something else. When I was cleaning the cut on your forehead, you instinctively turned your head to maintain visual contact with the surrounding area. That's a tactical awareness drill that we teach in special operations training. It's not something you learn in journalism school. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications of what he was saying. Her inherited instincts weren't just general survival skills. They were specific military behaviors that she had never consciously learned but somehow knew. Chief, I need to ask you something else, Sarah said. That day in the marketplace after you asked about my training, I felt like you were still watching me, still evaluating something. What were you looking for? Rodriguez stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean where SEAL trainees could be seen running on the beach. When he turned back to her, his expression was serious. Ms. Martinez, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay in this room. The Navy occasionally identifies individuals who show natural aptitude for special operations work. Sometimes these people are already in the military. Sometimes they're civilians with relevant skills or backgrounds. He explained that there was a program, highly classified, that recruited individuals with exceptional abilities for specialized roles within the special operations community. Not everyone recruited became a SEAL or other special operations personnel, but some were trained for unique missions that required specific skill sets. Your background as a war correspondent, combined with the tactical instincts I observed, would make you potentially valuable for certain types of intelligence-gathering operations. Journalists have access to places and people that military personnel can't reach. Sarah felt her pulse quickening. Are you saying the Navy would be interested in recruiting me? I'm saying that after our encounter in Afghanistan, I filed a report noting your capabilities and background. That report was forwarded to certain people who make decisions about recruitment for specialized programs. The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. Everything was suddenly making sense in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. Her entire career as a war correspondent, her ability to operate in dangerous situations, her natural comfort in conflict zones, it had all been preparation for something she had never consciously considered. What would that involve? She asked quietly. I can't give you specifics, Rodriguez said, but I can tell you that there are people who would like to meet with you. People who can explain options that might be available to someone with your unique combination of skills and background. Sarah thought about her parents, about the classified mission that had taken their lives. She thought about the dreams and instincts she was still discovering within herself. Most of all, she thought about the feeling she had always had that her work as a journalist, while important, wasn't the full extent of what she was meant to do with her life. If I were interested in learning more, she said carefully, what would be the next step? Rodriguez reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was plain white with only a phone number printed on it. Call this number. Tell them Chief Rodriguez gave you the card and that you'd like to discuss opportunities for someone with your background. They'll know what that means. As Sarah took the card, she felt like she was standing at a crossroads. On one path lay her established career as a photojournalist, respected and successful but somehow incomplete. On the other path lay something unknown but potentially transformative, a chance to use abilities she was only beginning to understand. Chief, she said as she prepared to leave, can I ask you one more question? In the marketplace, when you were treating my injuries, you seemed to be looking for something specific. What was it? Rodriguez smiled for the first time during their meeting. I was looking for fear, he said. Most people in your situation would have been terrified, even with medical help arriving. But you weren't afraid. You were angry. That told me everything I needed to know about who you really are inside. As Sarah left the Naval Special Warfare Command, she clutched the business card in her hand. The SEAL medic's question in the marketplace had started her on a journey of discovery about her past. Now his observations and recommendations were pointing her toward a future she had never imagined possible. Sarah stared at the plain white business card for 3 days before finally making the call. She had returned to her apartment in Washington, D.C., trying to resume some semblance of normal life, but everything felt different now. The revelation about her parents' true background had shifted her understanding of herself, and Chief Rodriguez's suggestion about potential opportunities had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. When she finally dialed the number, a professional female voice answered simply, "Good morning. How may I help you?" "Chief Rodriguez gave me this number," Sarah said, her heart pounding. "He said I should call to discuss opportunities for someone with my background." There was a brief pause, then the voice said, "Please hold for a moment." The next voice that came on the line was male, older, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "Ms. Martinez, my name is Director Wells. Chief Rodriguez spoke very highly of your capabilities. I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss some possibilities that might interest you." The meeting was set for the following week at an office building in downtown D.C. that looked like any other federal government facility. Sarah arrived early, nervous but determined to learn what opportunities existed for someone with her unusual combination of skills and background. Director Wells turned out to be a man in his early 60s with gray hair and intelligent eyes that reminded her of her adoptive father. He led her to a secure conference room where they were joined by 2 other individuals, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, and a younger man who gave only his first name. "David, Ms. Martinez," Director Wells began. "What I'm about to discuss with you is classified information. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that simply being here obligates you to keep this conversation confidential, regardless of whether you decide to pursue any opportunities we might offer." Sarah nodded, signing several documents that she suspected would bind her to secrecy for the rest of her life. "We represent a joint task force that operates under various agency authorities," Wells continued. "Our mission involves gathering intelligence and conducting operations in areas where traditional military or intelligence personnel cannot effectively operate. We're particularly interested in individuals who can function in hostile environments while maintaining civilian cover." Dr. Chen spoke next, her voice clinical but not unkind. "Your background is unique, Ms. Martinez. You have extensive experience working in conflict zones, established credentials as a journalist that provide natural cover for travel and access, and according to Chief Rodriguez's assessment, inherited tactical instincts that could be developed into operational capabilities." David, who Sarah suspected was younger than he looked, pulled out a tablet and showed her a series of photographs. They depicted various locations around the world: a cafe in Prague, a market in Morocco, a hotel lobby in Bangkok. "These are places where we need eyes and ears," David explained. "Locations where a journalist conducting interviews or researching stories would have natural access, but where traditional intelligence operatives might stand out or face restrictions." Sarah studied the images, her mind automatically cataloging the tactical advantages and challenges each location would present. She realized she was already thinking like an operative rather than a journalist, and the recognition both thrilled and worried her. "What exactly would this involve?" she asked. "Initially, enhanced training," Wells replied. "We would build on the natural abilities you've demonstrated and the skills you've developed as a war correspondent. Advanced situational awareness, surveillance detection, communication protocols, and basic self-defense techniques," Dr. Chen added. "The psychological evaluation Chief Rodriguez conducted was preliminary, but it suggests you have the mental resilience and adaptability necessary for this type of work. However, we would need to conduct more comprehensive assessments before making any firm offers." Sarah thought about her parents, about the classified mission that had ended their lives. "My birth parents died during a classified operation. How do I know this won't be just as dangerous?" The 3 exchanged glances before Wells answered. "I knew your parents, Ms. Martinez. Michael and Catherine were exceptional operators who took on extremely high-risk missions by choice. What we're proposing for you would be different. You would be working under journalistic cover, which provides significant protection. The intelligence gathering we have in mind is observation and reporting, not direct action. But there would be risks, David said honestly. Any intelligence work involves some level of danger. The question is whether you're willing to accept manageable risks in service of something larger than yourself. Sarah found herself thinking about all the stories she had covered as a journalist, all the conflicts and crises she had documented. She had always been an observer, recording events but never truly influencing their outcome. The opportunity to actively gather intelligence that could prevent conflicts or protect innocent people was compelling in a way that surprised her. If I were to say yes to this training, what would that look like? She asked. Dr. Chen outlined a program that would begin with 6 weeks of intensive assessment and basic training at a facility she couldn't name. Sarah would learn advanced tradecraft, enhanced observation techniques, secure communication methods, and physical skills that would complement her existing capabilities. The training would be demanding, Wells warned. We're not trying to turn you into a Navy SEAL, but we do need to ensure you can protect yourself and complete missions in hostile environments. Some candidates don't make it through the program, David added. If you complete the initial training successfully, you would return to your journalism career with additional capabilities and occasional special assignments. Your editor and colleagues would never know about your dual role. To them, you would simply be a correspondent who happens to have exceptional access in certain situations. Sarah realized that this was exactly what her parents had done. They had served their country while maintaining cover identities that protected both them and their mission. The difference was that her mother and father had operated in direct combat situations, while she would be working in the shadows of legitimate journalism. There's something else you should know, Wells said. Chief Rodriguez wasn't the only one who noticed your capabilities. We've been tracking your career for several years, particularly your work in Syria and Ukraine. Your ability to gain access to sensitive locations and build trust with sources in dangerous situations has been remarkable. The revelation that she had been under observation for years should have been unsettling, but instead Sarah felt a strange sense of validation. Her instincts and abilities hadn't gone unnoticed, and there were people who valued what she could contribute to important work. I need time to think about this, Sarah said finally. Of course, Wells replied. Take 2 weeks. If you decide you're interested, call the same number you used to reach us. If we don't hear from you, we'll understand that you've chosen to continue your current career path. As Sarah left the building, her mind was racing with possibilities and concerns. The opportunity was everything she hadn't known she wanted, but it would also mean living a double life, keeping secrets from friends and colleagues, and accepting risks that could have serious consequences. But as she walked through the streets of Washington, Sarah realized that she had been preparing for this moment her entire adult life. Every dangerous assignment, every instinct that had kept her safe, every story she had uncovered had been leading to this choice. The question wasn't whether she was capable of doing this work. The question was whether she was brave enough to become who she was truly meant to be. 2 weeks later, Sarah made the call that would change her life forever. The same professional voice answered, and within hours she was on a flight to a location she was told she couldn't discuss with anyone. The training facility was hidden in the mountains of Virginia, disguised as a corporate retreat center, but equipped with everything needed to transform journalists into intelligence operatives. The other candidates in her training class came from diverse backgrounds. There was Marcus, a foreign correspondent who had covered conflicts in Africa for 15 years. Elena was a documentary filmmaker who specialized in stories from Eastern Europe. James had been a financial journalist who had developed an expertise in tracking money through international criminal organizations. What they all shared was the same combination of legitimate professional credentials and natural, operational instincts that had attracted the attention of the task force. The training was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Her years of hostile environment training as a journalist had taught her how to stay safe in dangerous places, but this program taught her how to be dangerous herself. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, how to spot and lose a tail, how to conduct dead drops and brush passes, and how to defend herself if cornered. Dr. Chen conducted regular psychological evaluations, probing Sarah's motivations and stress responses. The most difficult part of this work isn't the physical danger, she explained during one session. It's the isolation. You'll be carrying secrets that you can never share with the people closest to you. That kind of emotional burden breaks some people. But Sarah found that the training felt natural in a way that surprised even her instructors. Her inherited tactical instincts adapted quickly to operational requirements. The situational awareness that had kept her alive in war zones translated perfectly to intelligence gathering. Most importantly, the anger that Chief Rodriguez had observed in her after the marketplace bombing provided the motivation she needed to excel in every aspect of the program. The physical training was demanding but not impossibly so. Sarah was already in good shape from years of working in challenging environments, and her instructors focused on teaching her skills that complemented her existing capabilities rather than trying to turn her into a commando. She learned basic hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, and escape and evasion techniques. But the most valuable part of the training was learning to think like an intelligence operative while maintaining her cover as a journalist. She practiced conducting interviews that gathered intelligence while appearing to pursue legitimate stories. She learned to identify and cultivate sources who could provide information about threats to national security. Most importantly, she learned to recognize when a situation was becoming too dangerous and how to extract herself safely. 6 weeks into the training, Director Wells visited the facility to observe the candidate's progress. Sarah was in the middle of a complex exercise that required her to gather specific intelligence while maintaining her cover at a simulated diplomatic reception. As she worked the room, identifying targets and gathering information while appearing to be simply a journalist mingling at a social event, she felt completely in her element. After the exercise, Wells pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Chief Rodriguez was right about you," he said. "You're not just good at this work, you're exceptional. But I want to make sure you understand what you're signing up for." He told her about her first assignment. There was a situation developing in Eastern Europe where legitimate journalists were having difficulty getting access to key sources. The task force needed someone with impeccable credentials who could operate in the region while gathering intelligence about potential threats to regional stability. "This won't be a combat mission," Wells assured her, "but you'll be operating in a country where American intelligence operatives face significant risks. Your cover as a journalist will provide protection, but it won't eliminate all dangers." Sarah thought about her parents, about the classified mission that had taken their lives. Then she thought about Chief Rodriguez's question in the marketplace, about the journey of discovery that had led her to this moment. Finally, she thought about all the stories she had covered as a journalist, all the conflicts she had witnessed but been unable to influence. "Accept the assignment," she said without hesitation. The remaining weeks of training focused on preparing her for the specific requirements of her first mission. She studied the political situation in her target country, learned about the key players she would need to approach, and practiced the cover story that would explain her presence and interest in the region. On her final day at the training facility, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Chief Rodriguez had driven up from Coronado to see her graduate from the program. They met in the same conference room where she had first learned about the assessment and basic training. "I wanted to see how you were doing," he said, "and to apologize for putting you on this path without really explaining what it might lead to." Sarah smiled, realizing how much had changed since their first meeting at the Naval Special Warfare Command. "You don't need to apologize, Chief. You saw something in me that I didn't even know existed. That question you asked in the marketplace saved my life in more ways than one." Rodriguez nodded, studying her face. "You look different. More confident, more focused. The training has been good for you." "It has," Sarah agreed. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. My parents died serving their country in ways that mattered. Now I have the chance to continue that tradition in my own way." As they prepared to part ways, Rodriguez handed her a small package. Inside was a combat medic patch like the one he wore on his uniform, along with a note that read, "For Sarah Martinez, who taught me that some people are born ready for the fight, even when they don't know it yet." 3 days later, Sarah was on a plane to Prague, carrying press credentials that identified her as a freelance journalist, researching a story about economic development in Eastern Europe. Her real mission was to gather intelligence about a weapons trafficking network that posed a threat to regional security. As the plane descended toward the airport, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A terrorist's bomb in an Afghan marketplace had nearly killed her, but it had also set in motion a chain of events that had revealed her true identity and purpose. A Navy SEAL, Medic's casual question had unlocked abilities she never knew she possessed, and pointed her toward a destiny she never could have imagined. Looking out the airplane window at the lights of Prague below, Sarah Martinez felt a deep sense of rightness about the path she had chosen. She was no longer just a journalist who happened to work in dangerous places. She was an intelligence operative who used journalism as cover for serving her country in ways that mattered. The scared young woman who had been trapped under debris in a Kandahar marketplace was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. Chief Rodriguez had been right about her that day. She hadn't been battle-trained, but she had been born ready for the battle. As the plane touched down and Sarah prepared to begin her new life as a covert operative, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important questions are the ones that force us to discover who we really are. And sometimes the answers to those questions can change everything.